Today we're going to talk about the data migration and some best practices and lessons learned and the process we follow here at Utopia Global Inc. to do data migrations into the SAP ERP CRM systems. One of the issues that we have found in doing this over the past 10 years is that the data is often not dealt with up front, and data issues are identified very late in the project, and they continue to cause cost overruns, time overruns, and serious data issues. 75% of people that were talked to experience data management issues late in the project lifecycle. And again, what that runs into are some of those cost overruns and time overruns, and we're going to talk about some of the best practices and things that we've learned over the years doing these migrations. We follow a proven ASAP methodology from SAP that maps just to the project methodology that SAP uses. It follows the project prep, blueprint, realization, final prep, and then go live. And there's a methodology that goes along with that that fits into the technology for each of those. And we're going to talk about that methodology and best practices as we go forward today. The reason that it's mapped so closely to the SAP process is so that we can report, and it helps remove the mystery of the migration steps. You know where you are in the roadmap all along the way. It gives you a proven framework that allows you to help your project scoping and planning. It reduces your time and your risk. It takes the ability to steer the inexperienced staff away from pitfalls because we've already experienced the pitfalls in the past and helped fix those, and we know what to look for. And we're going to talk about some of those pitfalls. Finally, it builds the integrity of the migrated data. In the past, you've read stories, even with the government, about failed expensive data systems, expensive computer systems. What they don't tell you about that is that computer systems work exactly the way they were implemented. People could log on, they could research the data, they could enter data. The problem is that the data inside there wasn't fit for use. It didn't have integrity, and they migrated bad data, so you migrated bad information. They called that a failed project, but what it was an incomplete project. The software worked just as it should, but the data didn't give them the information they needed. Now, how do you take care of that? Well, you follow a proven migration approach. This is a slide actually from our friends at SAP that shows about the best practices for data migration methodology that they actually publish, and here at Utopia we support and extend. So you have your target system, which is an SAP system, ECC, CRM, whatever modules in ERP, what have you. You have your source data from your legacy. Could be Excel spreadsheets, it could be flat files, it could be from another application, J.D. Edwards, PeopleSoft, any number of other applications, just plain from database or XML files. First thing we do is we take that data and we extract it into a staging area. And then we profile the data. Profiling allows us to see what data is there, if the elements exist, if the data is in the fields, if the data is fit for use. Does it need to be reformatted? Does it need to be cleansed? Is there duplication? Basically understanding about the data and helping you to map your project out. If you can understand the data issues up front, you have a better idea of how to figure out what the amount of time it's going to take to cleanse that, so you can set a realistic schedule and expectations. Secondly, once you've profiled the data, you need to go through the cleansing exercise. If it's sort of customer vendor data, you're going to look at things, names, addresses, phone numbers. You're going to make sure that they fit in the right place, that phone numbers are in the proper formats. If it's things like SKUs, material master, you're going to want to parse that, standardize it, make sure that they're like representations, and then compare it to make sure you're not buying parts and pieces of material from multiple vendors at multiple prices, etc. Once you've cleansed the data, you're going to transform that data to its proper format and fitness for use, and you're going to validate it. And this is where the data migration best practices really come into play. The validation process allows you to take the configuration data from the ECC system and pull that configuration data into your staging area. And what this allows you to do is to iterate through the data and deal with all of the data validation transformation issues up front before you try to do a live load. This way you have the ability to route the data to a particular subject matter expert that can actually give an answer or cleanse that data. There are mechanisms within the best practices methodology that give you screens to be able to pull up the invalid records and actually act upon them or put notes about what they're going to do or who needs to fix them, and then you iterate through that data again until all of the data that you have that's going to be loaded into the SAP system has been validated against the rules that will be checking the data as it's entered into the system. It's pre-validated, so it's going to load at load time. The output of the best practices are iDocs, the preferred, or LSMW files that are then loaded natively into the SAP system. This actually allows you to reconcile the data to know that all of the data you pulled from your legacy system, you entered it through the staging area into the best practices and loaded it in SAP and then come back and reconcile it so you know where 100% of your data goes. That's very key for your transparency and your data governance. It also provides performance analytics and dashboards throughout the process for doing things like remediation of some of the errors, telling you where you are in the life cycle of the project, etc. And I mentioned this, but this all facilitates the transparency, communication, and governance necessary to have a successful go-live. Now, you've migrated your data. You have a new system, cleansed, migrated data. What are you going to do with that data now? You're going to start using that system. The Data Warehousing Institute did a study that's talked about 6 months after you go live with a new software system that 20% of your data has aged or is not fit for use. And what is the reason for that? Well, there's a number of reasons depending on the type of data. Things change, descriptions change, addresses change, businesses move, they change their name, a number of things like that. Number one issue they found is that errors are entered into the system by employees. 75% of all errors in data are entered in by an employee. And that may not sound reasonable. It sounds like a high number for errors, but if you think about the way you go about and you do your job, when you're entering in data that you know, you don't always pay attention to the keyboard as you're entering it. It's very easy to make mistakes. If you don't have a mechanism to validate that data as you enter it in, the system's going to allow you to enter in duplicates and mistake data. If you have an automated process that will reutilize the rules that you created during your migration process and can act upon that data at the time that it's entered in, you can give the person entering the data the ability to catch their mistake and enter the data incorrectly. Because the best person to make that call is the person entering the data. They're the subject matter expert. If it goes into the system and it needs to be dealt with later by somebody who isn't an expert of the data, it's going to require them much more time to figure out what the issue is and what the fixed process is. So in this process, once you've done the migration, you can have the ability to close your old transactions that you're not going to move forward and to archive possible data and decommission systems. And then to do, going forward, a real-time invocation of those rules as you enter in data so that you can capture those errors. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to show you a small presentation where I'm entering in a material into this SAP graphical user interface and invoke these rules that were created during the transformation process and call them real-time. This system, by the way, is utilizing a software from SAP called Data Services. All of these rules are pre-configured and templates are built for data services. Data Services is built with integration into the SAP ECC systems natively to be able to transport data back and forth natively and efficiently. So what are some of the things we've learned about this process? It's irrespective of the tools you use or the methodologies. What we've learned are our 10 key takeaways. First one is talking about determining the purpose of your data. Remember I talked about the profiling and looking at the data as we first staged it. Analyzing the information in the environment, identifying where the data is, how to be leveraged, who actually uses the data. You determine how the data can be used effectively tomorrow and in the future, not just how it's used now, but what is the purpose of the data going forward. Taking an as-is assessment before moving the data is that profiling. Data is dynamic, it's changing all the time. And it's actually directly tied to business processes and uses. So establishing data standards and defining business rules for migration for the ongoing use of that data with the owners and subject matter experts is key. Account for data quality, especially in legacy systems. Migrating data is more than just moving data. Perform a thorough data quality assessment up front and ensure that the standardization supports the new uses for today and tomorrow. This is including standardization, deduplication, removing non-relevant information. Finally, the number 4 is validate and refine the business rules. Data needs to comply and be compatible with current business and validation rules. You need to define rules for one-time data conversion and migration while designing them for adaptability to future regulatory and policy requirements. And this is where we talk about in the real-time world actually reutilizing these validation rules that you create at this point in time. Ensure that governance rules are established early and who's responsible for the data. This is very key. After determining who owns and has a final say over information, you need to establish strategic and operational stewards to align with the sponsors for continuing guidance on scope, direction, and support. Somebody has to have responsibility for the data and the decisions. And you as a company should take responsibility for your data migration. The company, not only the systems integrator or the data integrator, has to live with the results of the migration. Based on the aptitude and attitude, find the right people to manage the process and have them own it. Number 7 is key. Don't rely 100% on a tool. Tools are only that. They're a tool. Tailor fields and business rules to your company's needs with internal experts leveraging tools while obtaining the right information to complete the data migration. So getting the right information is only part of the process of utilizing a tool. It's the subject matter experts that have to work along with the people that use the tools. You need to continually validate through the process. Don't wait until it's complete to look for problems. Fixing the mistakes after the fact, we talked about that earlier, they're expensive, they're time consuming. Fixing them with the right people at the right time will ensure for a smoother transition in testing and evaluation process. Number 9 is engage the business. As the migration takes place and it nears completion, you need to be mindful of what users, customers, and business partners that have to live with the results. You need to choose accurately who makes the final decision over whether the migration is good enough. It's never going to please everybody. Somebody needs to own the process and make the call of when it's good enough to move forward. And then you need to measure the impact. You need to figure out who should be involved in testing and evaluation and has the final sign-off on the migration. But you need to also make sure that you're keenly aware of who the ultimate consumer is. After the go live, they're the ones that have to live with this process and work on it on a day-to-day in their day-to-day lives. So here's a little bit of our methodology summary that has to do more with the pre-prep and cleansing. So we extract the input data, we do the data profiling analysis, we map the data. This is talking about material master here. So we go through this, we create a taxonomy, understand the noun modifiers, the ability to identify the data and parse it into the different taxonomies. Once it's standardized, we're going to dedupe it, and we're going to make sure that there's just a single version of the truth. Then we're going to enrich that data and add to it and make sure that it's as full as it can. We're going to classify it to the UNSPC, ISO, or other standards. We're going to translate it if we need to, and then it's going to be passed over for process to migrate into the system once the data is clean. The migration best practices talks about after the prep of the data and the mapping, it takes it through to the end systems and validates it against the configuration rules of the ECC. With that, we'll open up the questions. But prior to that, I would like to tell you that Utopia Global Inc. has a laboratory, Labs, that we have set up a full SAP ecosystem. We have the ability to take customer data, process it, import it into the target system that would emulate the customer environment, and show you what your data would look like in a real live environment. If that's something you're interested in, my contact information is on the screen here. Please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I would like to open it up to any questions that might have come up during the webinar.
Thank you, Jeff. The floor is now open for questions. Please use the GoToWebinar question pane located on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. And
you know, Terry, as we're asking for questions, I promised to do a short demo of our RTD, our real-time data governance, to show how things could be reutilized. As we're putting the questions in, let me go and share my screen and actually show you the process of how we utilize the rules that we talked about in data migration in that real-time fashion. Would that be okay, Terry?
Perfect.
Okay. So what I'm showing you here is the SAP graphical user interface, and I've entered in a code of MM01 to create a material. So as I go through the process of creating that material, it's going to ask me to enter in my information, and I'm going to enter it in, and I'm going to go ahead and enter in minimal information and show you how this system works. So if I hit save here and say this is what I'm going to put this material in there, I want to create it. It comes down, and at the bottom of my screen here, it's telling me to fill in all the required fields. Sorry. So that is a required field because of the configuration rules within the SAP system. So if I put the minimum fields in here and then I say I'm going to save it, the first thing it did was it took the information that I put in and it called out to some rules that were created in the tool Data Services. Let me open that up. Data Services is the ETL tool that we talked about that uses the migration best practices. What we've done is there's a process, a real-time process that's created as a web service. So when I hit the button to create that material inside of ECC, it had a user exit that called out to this process. And you can see this is a top-down process. It goes through a series of steps. And it comes back, and it took that information up the ball valve lever FNPT 316SS 2 quotes per period and 300 LB, and it applied the taxonomy that we set forth, and it standardized it, and it actually broke those different elements out into their atomic pieces and compared them and standardized them. The next step it's going to do, it's going to allow me to accept the material description, which is the standard, or use the original. I'm going to accept it. When I click on it, it's going to go back over here, and it's actually going to call this process, this next process, which is going to go and look in the ECC system, pull out potential matching records, compare them, and tell me if they're actually duplication in the system. So once I hit this, it calls the next process, and it's going to go out there, and sure enough, it tells me that I've already got 4 records in the system that are exactly what I'm keying in. Obviously, I don't clean up after my demonstrations all the time, but the point here is to stop me from doing that. So I can either say create or abort. I would pick abort here so I don't put a 5th one in, but I know my process, and I'm actually going to say create to show you that we can extend this process. It's telling me that there's some mandatory fields that we've decided. These aren't mandatory because of the ECC configuration. They're mandatory because my business said I need to have a net weight for this. So it's forcing me, based on my web service that I created with those additional rules that aren't configuration rules, to go in and fill this field out. So I'm actually going to step back and abort this process now so that I don't create another duplicate. But that's the process of how to interact real time and reuse the rules that you invested in during a data migration process. That's the takeaway here. Don't create a process that's useless in the future to throw away. Have a process as the building blocks to your governance practice going forward. Invoke it into real time and invoke some and get started on a governance lifecycle process. So that's my demonstration that I had. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them at this point.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And yes, there are a few questions that have come in. Feel free to continue to ask questions in the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen. But Jeff, the first question, what is the most common mistake that you see customers doing during data migration projects?
That's a good question. We touched on that in the very beginning where it said 75% of respondents found data issues late in a migration process. Overlooking the state of your data and its fitness for use up front will cause cost and time overruns every time. And if you're not experienced at this process and if you don't do these every day, you're going to overlook things. So bringing in somebody who understands this process and does it, and it's their job to understand and know and keep all of these things at the forefront so you look at them up front and you have a successful go live on time.
Okay, we have another question. What data migration tools do you typically recommend and why?
Well, obviously, any ETL tool on the marketplace can pretty much be used for data migration. We tend to use the SAP Data Services toolset for a couple specific reasons. There's pre-built content that we've been talking about here for best practices for data migration, and that pre-built content allows you to pull in that configuration from the ECC system and iterate through the data and have the data ready for load before you go live. The integration between these best practices, which are pre-built templates and jobs, and the integration between the reading and writing and permissions between data services and SAP helps ensure your process is going to go as smoothly as possible.
Great.
Next question, if there is one.
Sure. How is data from multiple source systems reconciled and merged, and what strategies are used to define and track data preparation?
So the mechanism is that inside of data services, there is a very robust data quality engine that is about 25 years old and has been tried and tested during those 25 years. And that's the data quality technology that originated with First Logic and then it became part of business objects with the acquisition as SAP. So that is, bar none, some of the best data quality software that's been in the industry, and that gives you the ability to parse, standardize, cleanse, dedupe, and get the data ready. So that's how you take the multiple sources in. You rationalize across them, you standardize, you find out if there's duplication, you group that, and then you make your determination how to do that, what you're going to do with based on your governance rules. Then the data is captured in the best practices templates as it's read and it's tagged, and so we know 100% of the data that comes in. On the back end side, once the data is loaded, there's audit reports to show you the IDs of all the data that's been loaded, and they reconcile back against the input number of records to quickly give you an answer that where the data went, if it went in or it didn't go in, and why it didn't go in. And that's how we cleanse it and how we reconcile it.